Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your podcast, Better for America. If you're not getting your political news from AMAC, then you won't be informed about American politics, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. And to everyone out there listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. We have got a great show with someone very important. Today with us is the former DEA Deputy Chief of International Operations, Jeffrey Stamm, and he's here today to talk to us about a very important issue. During Jeff's 31-year career with the DEA, he served in a myriad of domestic and foreign assignments. Following his retirement from the DEA in 2016, he was appointed as the executive director of the Midwest High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area for the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, and he effectively coordinated drug control efforts with his local, state, and federal drug control counterparts across the heartland of America until 2022. He speaks Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese and has lectured extensively to various audiences at international conferences, training venues, community organizations, and universities, including the U.S. Naval Academy's Foundation on Irregular Warfare. Mr. Stamm is the author of On Dope, a scholarly and impassioned argument for the need to maintain a strong drug law enforcement response across our states and nation. Jeffrey Stamm, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Better for America.
Well, thanks for having me, Rebecca. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this very important topic that is critical to the survival of this nation.
It sure is. It's at the top of the list. When we ask and poll our AMAC members, they tell us that the issue that we're seeing at the border wall, and specifically the number of people that are dying each year, the CDC has really estimated that more than 108,000 people in the United States have died of overdoses between 21 and 22, and 70% of those involve fentanyl. I was shocked to learn that. Now, the Biden administration seems to be doing very little or nothing in its efforts to catching drugs at the border and keeping our country free of lethal drugs. So my question to you is that we know that due to the lack of border security, this problem is surely impacting average everyday Americans, today more than ever. If left unchecked, what kind of long-term impact could this have on our nation? What do you see out there?
Well, let me first say that I think the U.S. right now is suffering a death from 1,000 cuts. With all due respect to our Attorney General, the White House, FBI Director Wray, the principal threat to this country is actually not domestic violent extremism, which is simply a euphemism for what they consider to be white supremacism, but it's actually the triple threat of drugs, crime, and terrorism, morphed recently in relation to the Mexican drug cartels in the form of narco-terrorism. It's important to know that, to consider that the fact that about 108,000 drug overdose deaths in our country every year is about 300 every single day. And I would ask people to consider, what do you think our mainstream media would do every night if 300 dolphins were to wash up dead in our beaches every single day?
It is just shocking. I mean, really it is. And I think it's terrible. It's shameful that major media is quiet on this. We are a member of the Texas Border Security Coalition, and we have been made aware of the stronghold that cartels have over our border travel and people. Now, we're talking about drugs, but boy, when I learned about the people trafficking, the trafficking of human beings, this really should alarm everyone listening. In the past 2 years, cartels in Mexico have made more money off of trafficking people than they have on drugs, with the wealth of some cartels being greater than some states in Mexico. So, Jeff, can the cartels amass enough money and power to overthrow the central government of Mexico, or is that a stretch? And what would this mean for America?
If you take a look at the difference in the methods and tactics of both terrorist organizations and drug traffickers, they're remarkably similar. The only difference really is a matter of degree. Terrorists look to overthrow the entire existing political order, replace it with some different form of government. But drug traffickers, not so much. They only look to degrade and erode those government forces that oppose them, principally the police, so they can continue to use the weakened husk of the nation state to make money off the backs of addiction. And that's precisely what the Mexican drug cartels have done. Every year, Americans alone spend over $150 billion buying illegal drugs. Ultimately, about half of that flows into the coffers of the various Mexican drug cartels. Now, many people certainly remember the Colombian cocaine cartels from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. You know that they were very, very good at combining international drug trafficking with new levels of violence. But it's important to know that the Mexican cartels today make them look like pikers. In addition to new levels of violence, which have completely crossed into that realm we call terrorism, the international economists have described what the Mexican cartels have become highly adept relative to market diversification, both the vertical and horizontal integration of markets. Vertically, Mexican drug cartels have come to dominate every level of drug production, transportation, trafficking across borders, even wholesale and retail level distribution, not just in the U.S., but in over 50 countries throughout the world. But also horizontally, meaning the Mexican cartels have branched out into new types of drugs not traditional to Mexico, beginning with methamphetamine in the 90s, and certainly, as we know, fentanyl today. But even beyond drugs themselves, into new types of organized crime, and not just human trafficking and extortion and auto theft, but illegal mining and logging, the illegal trafficking of exotic species to China. There's a new slang term they use in Mexico today called a huachicolero, which roughly translates into an oil pirate. Every 90 minutes, there's an illegal tap on a Pemex oil pipeline in that country designed to sell oil in the black market. It's about to bring that country to its knees. But it's not critical that Americans know the territorial boundaries and the extent of Mexican drug cartels in Mexico, but I think what's more important to us is that, according to Homeland Security, the various Mexican cartels have a presence in over 3,000 American cities and towns. They are here solely to sell drugs to Americans. I can think of no greater example of Cicero's warning to his fellow Romans than allowing an enemy within the gates. In just the last 3 years, we've seen, as you mentioned, fentanyl, a 500% increase in the amount of fentanyl seized on the Mexican border. It's also important to know that, as you said, 70% of all of our overdose deaths in this country, drug poisonings really, are driven by fentanyl or opioids. But drug overdose deaths are also up in terms of methamphetamine and cocaine. We've seen a tenfold increase in methamphetamine production and trafficking into the U.S. in the last decade. Clearly, the Mexican cartels are driven to flood this country with as much highly addictive and dangerous substances as they can. And for those who die of overdoses, for the Mexican cartels, it's simply a price of doing business. They care nothing about the American citizens or their fellow Mexicans for that matter.
Yeah, this is really serious stuff, and all of this is tied to crime, soaring crime in every which way you look, really, and it's right here at our doorstep. And that brings me to George Soros, because we know that he has been funding for the last several years, billionaire George Soros, that is, quietly funding campaigns, dumping tens of millions of dollars into progressive DAs who are really pushing for progressive criminal justice reform like cashless bail. My question for you is, how much of an impact is George Soros's funding really having on our legal system?
Well, I think over the years it's been both insidious and huge. If you take a look at every single marijuana legalization initiative that's been put forth in all of our states, every single one of those has been pushed by George Soros. He's known as Daddy Weed Bucks by the marijuana legalization industry. Personally contribute over $52 million to the legalization issue all across the United States. But if you really want to know what George Soros is up to, all you have to do is read his autobiography, Soros on Soros. His ultimate objectives don't just include open borders and mass immigration into the U.S., but the complete transformation of American society. And not just with marijuana legalization, that's just his foot into the door, but the legalization of all drugs. His Open Society foundations and his Drug Policy Alliance entities have not just contributed to the legalization efforts throughout the country and the corruption of our media relative to their positions on drugs, but he's also contributed over $40 million electing far-left district attorneys in over 75 jurisdictions in this country. And by the way, those jurisdictions represent about 1/4 of the total number of American citizens in this country. He is truly out to transform the U.S. And has also contributed to both the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots that have occurred since 2020, especially during 2020, which caused over $2 billion in damage, the deaths of over 26 people at least, as well as the injury of at least 2,000 law enforcement professionals across the country. As I said, he is not out to improve America, but according to his own words, but really to degrade and destroy America so that it can be rebuilt in his vision.
That's exactly right. Those on the left, journalists especially, I hold them personally responsible to report the truth in the news. And they're living in an alternate universe if they don't recognize how this open society is so bad, especially for future generations. For someone like you or I, we know the difference between right and wrong. But as we raise a younger generation of people, and we see that the society is really fraying, what do we do, sir? What can we do to change that? How do we counter someone, a billionaire, who's got that much power and control and influence?
Well, when I speak to law enforcement audiences across the country, I talk about 4 broad areas that I think we need to engage in as a country, as a government, and as a culture. First one is to re-educate. The public really needs to know what law enforcement knows across this country. That we're not engaged in mass incarceration, that our jails and prisons are not full of mere drug users. Most people don't have a clue how truly dangerous the world has become, how many people and organizations are out to prey upon Americans, how we have an entire country right on our southern border that's now in control of by the narco-terrorists and warlords. Number 2, I think we need to re-stigmatize, and that's a kind of a controversial word for many people, but I don't believe anyone, public or private, actually targets for abuse those who willingly step forward seeking help for their addictions. That's designed to be a straw man argument designed to absolve drug users of any responsibility. But since we know that the vast majority of drug addiction starts with recreational drug taking, that's precisely the behavior that we must stigmatize, at least every bit as much as our society has done with tobacco, for instance. And most of all, we need to stigmatize those social, political, and media influences that normalize and glamorize drug use. Number 3, relocate. This is not a Washington, D.C. only problem. We have to put the onus where it belongs, which is on individual citizens to take control of their own lives again. Quite simply, individual character and lawful behavior matter. They matter for self, and cumulatively they matter for society. If not, then as Edwin DeLatre has warned, the country's resources will be exhausted in efforts to save the citizens from themselves. Lastly, recommit. American law enforcement doesn't have the resources remotely proportionate to this threat. They are completely being overwhelmed. We know, in fact, that at 107,000 plus drug overdose deaths every year, and that figure's about to go up again, we actually know that drug trafficking is not a non-violent crime. In fact, it's been rightfully called the most murderous criminal activity in the history of this country. We also need a whole-of-government approach, just like this current administration has done with the Green Agenda. This is not just a law enforcement issue. Every level of government has to be involved in this. You know, back in the 1980s, when cocaine first started pouring out of Colombia into this country, President Reagan called up his Colombian counterpart and said that you guys either need to do something yourselves about cocaine production and trafficking, or you might as well stop sending us any of your coffee and cut flowers. And you know, Colombia stepped up and it became one of our biggest allies for decades since. We need that exact same thing to happen with not just Mexico, but maybe even more important relative to precursor chemicals, China. And lastly, the one thing we can do right now that we absolutely have to do is declare every single one of the Mexican drug cartels as a foreign terrorist organization pursuant to Title 8 United States Code, Section 219, to bring new tools to bear, new resources to bear against what is clearly an existential threat to this country.
Boy, those are great ideas. That is so good. I love it that you've just laid it out. And you'd think that our president, that he's got a lot of experienced people with a lot of knowledge right at his fingertips, people who are talking to him or he could talk to. Why do you think it is that Joseph R. Biden is doing nothing, aggressively anyway, to address what's happening right here in America at home? It's very frustrating for us.
That's
it is, right?
Clearly a mystery. As our commander-in-chief, not to mention his heads of Homeland Security and his Department of Justice have abdicated their responsibility for securing the homeland or for achieving justice at the southwest border and on behalf of their people. I think in a lot of ways we've become we find the necessity to be mean to people, to actually put drug traffickers and those who break the law in jail. We have to get back to doing that. We continue to just invite more of the same unless we enforce our legitimate drug laws and secure the legitimacy of our border. There is no other way. And if this current White House will not do that, then I think we clearly need a Congress and a movement from the people, which I think we're beginning to see, to take matters into their own hands to achieve legislatively and administratively what we need to do at the Mexican border. If I can just...
How hopeful are you? Yeah, go ahead.
Add one more point. That this is our society, one worth fighting for. And fight we must, not just with caring and compassion, but also with an aggressive and wide-ranging drug law enforcement response that upholds the rule of law and what is right. To not target, arrest, and imprison those who prey upon our fellow citizens, sometimes with unimaginable violence and barbarity, would not just be wrong, it would be cowardly.
I have a final question for you, sir. What kind of hope do you have for America's future? We're just a little over a week away from a midterm election, and we hear a lot of people that are running that recognize that this is serious stuff, and they promise, they're pledging to address what we're seeing at the southern border and the war on American people, really, where crime is just soaring. People have their head on a swivel. How hopeful are you that we might see a change with a new Congress?
Well, number one, we cannot continue at this pace. It's simply impossible. But I think the people are waking up to realize that the connection between drugs and illegal aliens and trafficking at the border is in fact not just degrading but destroying this country over time. There has to be a change, and I think we're seeing it. It's absolutely true that the bad guys have certain tactical advantages over us, especially at the border. First of all, they obey no laws. Secondly, they adhere to no policies or procedures that all of us citizens must. And lastly, as we seem to see every day, not just in Mexico, but in our own country with these narco-terrorists, they comply with no civilizational standards of any kind. Quite simply, the fact that, according to some estimates, 2/3 of all of our crime in this country could be directly attributable to drug use and trafficking. I think the people are waking up that we have to get a handle on that. And just think about what this country would look like if we had 2/3 less crime in the country. We do, in fact, have bad guys that are out to try to destroy this country. And I think people are waking up to the fact that the good requires constant reinforcement, whereas the bad needs only permission. And I think that permission is about to be taken away.
Jeffrey Stamm, thank you so much. I so appreciated having you with us here today. It is such an important topic, something we need to continue talking on. It's one of the reasons why we do this show, is really to educate and inform and get people involved here at AMAC, but we are fighting at that front. Thank you for being with us. I hope to have you back with me again soon in the coming months.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca, and I appreciate what you do bringing this issue to the forefront.
Well, thank you. God bless you. And I want to thank each and every one of you out there listening. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can listen to more just like it. Head to our YouTube channel or visit us at bfapodcast.us. You can also listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, or by downloading our free AMAC News app. And don't forget to follow us wherever you are on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.